Let's take a look inside the brain to understand what controls our unconscious behaviors and reactions. So there's a tiny part of our brain called the amygdala, as you can see. It's involved in fear processing, and it's part of the fast automatic thinking system of our brains. It guides behavior by forming associations between experiences on the one hand and unpleasant reactions on the other. So let me give you an example. Think of a banana. Can you picture it, smell it, taste it, fruity, sweet? Got it? Now look at this word, vomit. Now, on seeing that word vomit, many of us had uncontrolled reactions. We probably cringed, made some noise, the hair on our arms likely raised up. All of this happened involuntarily. That was the amygdala. The amygdala will associate those two things together, bananas and vomit. And if you had to pick up a banana after watching this talk, for a while at least, unconsciously, your amygdala is going to warn you against doing so because it's already made an association between a banana and vomit. The amygdala does this with people as well, people who are different to us. The amygdala makes associations between people in our outgroups and the negative experiences we may have or perceptions we may have of them. Remember that feeling of distrust and anxiety we feel when we are with our outgroup? The amygdala stores that and builds up an unconscious bias towards others. We all have these unconscious biases against other people. It can be biases against gender, sexuality, origin, race, age. Everyone holds these biases. And with most of us, we're unaware that we hold them because 98% of these biases we hold against others are unconscious. So what do? How do we begin to address the unconscious biases we hold when we aren't even aware of them? Well, one way of gaining some insight is through an online test that you can take called the Implicit Association Test, or basically the unconscious bias test. The test was developed by Harvard University professors almost 10, 15 years ago to understand the unconscious associations we make when we see people who are different to us. Essentially how it works is you go online, you choose a number of tests. I'll tell you about the test I chose. I chose the race test. And what happens is images of black faces and white faces appears on the computer screen. And all I got to do is press the E key when I see a black face and the I key when I see a white face. Pretty simple. Black face, E key, white face, I key, black face, E key. And so it goes. After a while, the test starts to put up words next to pictures. So sometimes I'll see a black face with positive words like trust, happiness, joy. Sometimes I'll see a black face with negative words. Sometimes I'll see a white face with positive words, sometimes a white face with negative words. And so it goes. All I've got to do is press the E key, the I key, whenever I see a black or a white face. So I did this test. Black face is E key, white face is I key. Off I go. I get to the end of the test, I press submit, I wait for the result, and the result says, I have a partial bias against people of color. Now, because I do this work of human rights, I figure the test must be wrong, so I do it again. E key, I key, black face, white face. I do the whole thing, trying to beat the test. Get to the end, the test says, I have a partial bias against people of color. My immediate reaction was that I'm a racist, and that was a bit of a shock to me. Of course, once I had time to reflect, I realized that what the test is not saying is that I'm a racist. What the test is saying is that I had a bias against people of color that I wasn't even aware of. So going back to that multiracial group of young people that I taught, who I believed were all the same and that I didn't see color, well, I realize now that unconsciously my brain was seeing color. And this has an impact. One impact is what we call microaggressions. And microaggressions basically are described as the kind of everyday verbal and sometimes non-verbal slights or insults directed towards people generally in our outgroup or marginalized people. Sometimes these are intentional, sometimes these are unintentional. But these acts communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative messages to people in our outgroups. So remember what I said about my early teaching career, believing I was colorblind and treating everyone equally. Well, what the black students in my class would have picked up on were microaggressions. When I too often turned towards the white student for a contribution, and in doing so turned away from the black student, that recurring behavior sent a message to the black students. And it was a hostile, unfriendly message. It was a slight. And at times we're all victims of microaggressions whenever we're in places where we're the minority, and at sometimes we're the perpetrators of these microaggressions. And some people, because of their gender, class, or skin color, they experience these microaggressions more often than others. And the implicit association test taught me about myself. And knowing that, I was able to take steps to beat the bias. Now we know what generally gets the unconscious system to kind of kick in. There are a few things. Here are 3 of them. When we have ambiguous or incomplete information, our unconscious takes over. When there are time constraints, when we are tired or we have a lot on our minds, the unconscious kicks over. And that is the average day in schools or informal education environments, in after-school programs, where we often don't have all the information to explain a child's behavior. We're often busy, we're often rushed, we're tired, we have a lot on our minds. And in those moments, the unconscious can take over. When these factors are at play, the amygdala is likely at work, and the unconscious automatic thinking part of our brain is taking control and acting on the biases that lurk unknowingly in 98% of our brain. And now for the good news. We can unlearn some of these unconscious biases we hold. You see, while we only control 2% of our thinking brain, that is a very powerful 2%. And with deliberateness and awareness, we can take over some control of the unconscious thinking, and in this case, take some control over the unconscious biases that we hold. Here are some steps we can take to counter the unconscious biases we hold. First of all, be aware. Research shows the more aware we are of our unconscious biases, the more likely we are to be able to retrain our brain. So the first step is clearly to do the online test. Do the implicit association test, and do it with a friend so that you can share the results and not feel burdened by them too. The results do not say that you are racist or sexist or ageist. It just says you have an unconscious bias that you were not aware of and that might be impacting on someone else. So be aware. Think about the interactions you have with people who are different to you, how you behaved after you've had those interactions. The more you do that, the more you retrain the brain. Another step in countering our unconscious biases is a simple when-then statement. So when you're in a situation where you'll be confronting people you have an unconscious bias for, then how are you going to behave? If we, before interactions, just think about that. When we're in these situations, how will we behave? Research shows that starts to rehardwire the brain. It doesn't mean that immediately you'll change your behavior, but the more you do it, the more it changes the unconscious bias. Another thing is exposing ourselves to what we call counter-stereotypic examples of group members. So if I have a bias against women, and a stereotype of women is that they're not as intelligent or as hardworking as men, then I need to make sure that I expose myself to women who are hardworking, who are successful. The more I do that, either through meeting or reading books or watching movies or even through photographs of women like that, that starts to rehardwire the brain. Simple things like individuating versus colorblind. The more we break from saying that we're colorblind to more accepting that we do see difference, and we look for differences in people. We look for individual characteristics of people and individual characteristics of people in our outgroups. We're able to rehardwire that part of the brain, that 98%. Standing in the shoes of an outgroup member makes a difference. So when we're having interactions, if we're able to think, how might the person who I have an unconscious bias for, someone in my outgroup, how might they be thinking or behave? Just that thinking about it starts to rehardwire. Making an effort to encounter and engage in positive interactions with members of our outgroups or people we have an unconscious bias for, that makes a difference. And crucially, these have to be positive interactions. So positive doesn't just mean we have to have fun. Sometimes it's just learning together, having an experience together. But mere contact isn't enough. What's important is that it's meaningful, positive, and that it's ongoing. We can't think that just one interaction with someone from an outgroup or someone for whom we have an unconscious bias will be enough. We need to be constantly doing this on an ongoing basis. As educators for global citizenship education, it's crucial that we begin our work understanding ourselves. It starts with us. It starts with us understanding how we see the world, how we see the people we work with, understanding the unconscious biases we hold, and that may be impacting on the work we do with the young people in our classrooms or in our after-school programs or extended education work. And so while we spend time learning new methodologies and pedagogies and creating content resources, it's crucial that we take the time to understand who we are, to be more aware of who we are, how we teach, and the world that we live in.